Well, let me ask you this, Kevin. If we were going to do a pizza film school with you about a movie that you love from your past, what would we do?
Oh, I'll tell you the movie right now. I'll show it to you. Hold on. I mean, this is the only movie that matters ever. Come on, man. Awesome to see you guys. And well, first of all, before we start doing the interview, how are you guys doing? I mean, I know I talked to you guys for Extraction you were on our podcast, but how are you guys doing in general creatively right now? How are you feeling creatively just at home? I feel like we're all home and we have more time than we think we do, but yet people are in very different creative spaces at this time.
I mean, look, it's a complicated time, but we've been fortunate. We actually get to. I mean, luckily, everyone in our personal lives is healthy, but also and safe. But we are able to do a lot of our work remotely. So, with the power of Zoom, Joe and I have been able to collaborate with a lot of our key collaborators, and we've been able to continue. We're in post-production on our film Cherry that we finished shooting in January, and we've been able to really do a lot of work remotely in the post-production process that we wouldn't have ever thought we could possibly do prior to this kind of quarantine.
How is that working? How is the post-production working on a film like that? Because I can't imagine if you guys were doing Endgame or Infinity War like this, if you had to work on post-production during this time. Are you just zooming into an edit session with your editor and working on the footage? I know it might be a stupid question, but how does it work?
No, I mean, you get a secure link and we sit here and same as we're talking to you, we talk to the editor, we have the picture in a different window. I mean, if anything, Zoom has proven to be very efficient, especially for the culture of, driving around Los Angeles in your car to meetings. You save all that time. I just find that we're much more productive during our days and the time becomes a lot more focused. So I think there may be some, changes that are going to be permanent to the way that, at least in the film business or to the way that, or at least at AGBO, our company, we're going to interact with people.
Part of what we've been doing that's really interesting is, you can only put over the internet a certain amount of data. And sometimes we're dealing in more complex levels of data. So what happens in those situations is we can actually get a computer over to each of our houses that has all the high quality data on it. So we're seeing the image the same as the color timer in the studio is seeing the image, or we're hearing the sound mix at the same quality level that the sound mixer in the studios is hearing the sound mix. And we can review them together off of that computer. We can also be hooked up online reviewing it together. So they're basically controlling our computer remotely, even if they're not sending us the data remotely. It's pretty fast.
Wow. Are you scoring like that too?
We're scoring.
We are, exactly.
We did some additional dialogue with Tom Holland while he was in the UK. Shipped him a microphone and we got on and just talked to each other, and he did the recording via link to our homes. So again, I mean, I just think the technology is at a point now, and it's being adopted, and the model's being proven while we're using it. So it's probably going to become a more efficient way to get things done, especially in the film business.
All right, let's talk about Russo Brothers Pizza Film School. Obviously, you have Mark Hamill this week, which is really, really cool. I'm excited that we can actually talk about it now because I don't know. This is such a big deal to have him on for a Star Wars film. It's massive. Listen, you guys have been working as directors for a while. You've worked with some of the biggest stars in the world. Tell me there's no way you weren't geeking out to talk to Mark Hamill about Empire Strikes Back. Is there an element, can you still be like that, geeked out about a film?
100%. I tend to find that no matter how much work we've done or who we've worked with over the years, that, there's sort of, if you hold someone in high regard, there's a little bit of a day or two of oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm working with this person. But people that had an impact, or actors or directors or filmmakers had an impact on you in your youth, when you meet those people, I think you revert very quickly to that emotional space you were in as a child. And I find those are sort of the most difficult to get your composure around, because you're just sitting there going, I cannot, the 10-year-old in you is going, I cannot believe I'm talking to Luke Skywalker right now. So it was a big deal for us. The whole idea behind Pizza Film School was just, we were in quarantine with our families. And one of the things I started doing is just watching films with my kids, old movies, and talking about them. You know, we're watching The Godfather and Once Upon a Time in the West, and just trying to give them an education on movies that predated them. And I think it was my daughter who said, why don't you and Uncle Anth get on the internet and do this, get on Instagram and do this for other people, because I'm sure lots of people are looking for something to occupy their mind right now. And so why don't you do like a DIY kind of film school approach to it? And so that's how we started it, and it's led to some amazing conversations. We've got Mark Hamill. We're talking to Taika about Big Trouble in Little China. We have Josh Brolin came on and talked to us about No Country for Old Men. We're going to be talking to Bob Gale about Back to the Future.
We're releasing all of our announcements, our future announcements right now.
That's all right. I think it's okay. But that's the approach to it, is really digging in on the movies that were highly impressionable to us as children, that made us want to become filmmakers. No Country is special because that to me is the one modern film that I've watched in the last 20 years that, I walked out of that theater shaking my head going, I don't know if I should quit the film business because I'll never be able to make a movie that good. And, it again inspired us to go to push forward in our careers, push to new highs in our careers. So it's really the whole approach to it.
The talk with Mark Hamill was so amazing that we had he's an amazing storyteller. I don't know if you've read much or seen much with him talking, but amazing storyteller, very smart, very engaging, and very generous in terms of like sharing his experience. We had to break it up into two-parter because it was so. Well, let me ask you this, Kevin. If we were going to do a pizza film school with you about a movie that you love from your past, what would we do?
Oh, I'll tell you the movie right now. I'll show it to you. Hold on. I mean, this is the only movie that matters ever. Come on, man.
One of the great commercial screenplays ever written. I mean, it's amazing when you go back and look at seminal films like Terminator or Back to the Future, Star Wars. This is the inception of commercial filmmaking as we know it. And these scripts are the structural template for how we make commercial movies. And to understand them is critically important, I think, to be a filmmaker and to want to be a filmmaker and to try to tell stories that access pop culture. So it's so great to go back and talk about the story structure of these films.
Well, it's funny because I'm glad you asked me that, Anthony, because Terminator 2 is the movie that changed my life. I mean, I was 8 years old. I saw it in between my parents on the couch. We rented the VHS from Farm Fresh up the street or Blockbuster, wherever it was. And when I saw Robert Patrick come out from the floor and become the twin police officer, who are, by the way, in real life, those are actual twin brothers. That's how they apparently did that. But that shot blew my mind so much that's the moment I fell in love with filmmaking. So I wanted to ask each of you, do you remember the film or the scene or the moment that you fell in love with filmmaking? It might be a loaded question, but that's my experience. Do you have a specific scene or moment?
I mean, we have a couple, I think.
We have a couple. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. I sort of had this moment when I was 17 where I watched Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
And I think it was we were really into music growing up, really into movies. And, I think a lot of my appreciation for music and movies was coming more from a pop angle, through my my early teens. And I remember, but I also had a great appreciation for literature and poetry, etc. And I remember watching Apocalypse Now when I was 17 and having this epiphany that film, I think it was the first time that it occurred to me that film was every bit as powerful and rich and complex as any other art. It had the potentials of any other art. And I remember, I'll never forget that moment of just seeing the fact that it can compete with any other art on that level, and having that moment on that film.
You transition. There's an age at which you transition. I mean, mine, just because we didn't start watching art house films until we were in high school and in our teen years. mine would have been, and said a million times, Empire Strikes Back. I just found that film, as a child, did not treat me like a child. There were adult themes in it. It was complicated. The hero didn't really win at the end, and it left me walking out of the theater with this sort of, subconscious, in a subconscious quandary where I was like, what the hell is life about? So I think that that was the seminal moment for me. But I do think that there's a transitional moment that happened to both Anth and I, between our when we got into our high school years, where you start to realize that film isn't just about plot, but there's also great thematics in film. And that's when we started to get into more art house films, when we were craving deeper thematics.
When you're talking with Mark Hamill for a special like this, and you obviously have that amazing airport sequence in Civil War where you do the Hoff homage with Tom Holland, in Ant-Man, Giant Man. I was actually interested because I remember reading a story that Holland hadn't seen Empire Strikes Back at that point. And on the set, when you were filming that or having him say that line, did he let you know then he had never seen Empire Strikes Back, or was that something that came out in an interview?
I think it was then.
It was at that time.
Were you shocked he had never seen it?
We were stunned, but we adore Tom. But I'll tell you, getting to know Tom, I mean, Tom is a young man. He's a very young man. So, and
you forget how much time has gone by.
Yeah, we've since gotten him to. Yeah, the movie's twice his age. So, we've since gotten him to, invest some of his time in watching some older films. But again, hence the whole pizza film school. Holland needed to go to pizza film school.
But exactly.
I have to tell you though, there's something very exciting. Like I actually got really excited when he said he hadn't seen it, because the idea was so novel to me and unexpected. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. Like Tom, because Tom is a guy whose sensibilities we really admire and value. And it's like, oh my God, we get to tap into his sensibilities and they're unaffected by Star Wars. I'm like, what is that? What does that mean? I was very excited by that.
Did you sit down and watch it with him or make him watch it?
No, we didn't make him watch it.
But I think we've since busted his chops enough that he's seen it. I think he's seen the Star Wars trilogy at this point.
Joe, I'm going to divert for 1 second because you brought up No Country for Old Men, and this is a question I would love to ask you guys. And No Country for Old Men was an interesting film for me because when I watched it the first time I saw it, when it ended, I didn't love the last sequence at first, but I was really young when I first saw it. And for years, I was like, I love this film, but I didn't love the last shot. And then I revisited the film about last year, and it completely changed, blew my mind beyond anything, because I'm 36 years old now. I'm older now that I've seen it, and I've lived life a different way, so it changed my perspective. What's a film for each of you that you saw at a younger age that didn't really affect you that much, that you rewatched later and watched it through a different lens now that you're parents and married? It's got to be was there a film that did that for you?
It's a really good question. I mean, I'm laughing because I always say that it's not a movie, but I always say that about Steely Dan music. So like, I didn't understand Steely Dan until I turned 40. I used to hate it, and now that once I hit 40, I'm like, I really like Steely Dan. These lyrics make a lot of sense to me. I'm trying to think of the filmic equivalent. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. This is not quite going back to childhood for me, but it is over a long span of time. And it just popped into my head because you're talking about the Coen brothers. I had a very similar experience with The Big Lebowski, believe it or not. I remember seeing it at a movie theater and being very tired when I saw it, and it was in a very full theater. And I remember coming out of the theater, like the Coen brothers are, my favorite lists are constantly changing, whether it be films or filmmakers or whatever. But if you really forced me to pick a filmmaker, I probably most often would say the Coen brothers. But it's my favorite. But so I walked out of Lebowski thinking, man, they kind of missed it on this one. And then I remember just randomly seeing it like a month or a year later or something on television and thought, oh, wow, this is actually really good. And then I remember seeing a third time, like a period after that, and going, my God, this is like one of my favorite movies I've ever seen. It just grows on you. A lot of their work does, because I think they're so subversive in how they use narrative. That very similar to your experience on No Country, like you can see something that's just so jarring to you or incongruous with what your expectations are or your pattern is with understanding and processing narrative. It can jar you a little bit at first, but once you settle into it, you can really start to appreciate its richness. It's almost like trying a fancy food for the first time, and it's a little odd at first, but then over time you develop a taste for it. I think because there's a complexity to their work that sometimes takes repeated exposure to really fully appreciate.
And guys, listen, if you guys have to go, let me know. I know there wasn't like a specific time frame on this. Do you mind if I ask you just like 2 more questions or so?
No, we're good. Yeah, we don't have anything until 1 o'clock.
If you guys need to go, just let me know.
It's awesome to be talking to you, to be honest.
Honestly, it's cool to talking to you guys too, because this room that I'm in is just filled with a lot of your movies, which is really cool. I'm going to go through a couple of, because I think that there are so many sequels in the history of movies that are better than the originals. And I think Empire Strikes Back is one of them, which is why I thought would be a good jumping point, because I think we can probably all agree it's the best Star Wars movie in the 9 film franchise. I don't know if you seem like, no?
No, 100%. Yeah.
All right, good. Okay, good. Yeah.
Unquestionably.
Yeah.
No question. All right. So I want to go through a couple classics and see where you guys land. I'm a Godfather 2 guy over a Godfather 1. Where are you guys on that?
That's interesting, because I just rewatched those. This is what inspired Pizza Film School. Was we were watching Godfather 1 and Godfather 2 with my kids. And if you watch them again, Anth, I don't know if you've seen it in a while, but from a technical standpoint, Godfather 2 is a much better film.
I agree.
Purely from a technical standpoint, it's more complex. It's shot, there's a greater scale to the storytelling. And when you go back and look at Godfather 1 now, you kind of see where like there's some gaps in the story, and you feel, in a way, you can feel the pressure that Coppola was under by the studio to create something that was going to be a hit, right? You can kind of feel it in the editing a little bit. There's some choices you can see that were made. And it's just not, so when you watch them back to back, you can see a filmmaker with complete freedom at all of his powers on Godfather 2. Now, Godfather 1 is still all movies, Godfather 1, and so Godfather 2 is here, but you just see a difference. And
Are you there too, Anthony?
To do with the freedom he had.
Here's the thing.
Sorry, I'm going to cut you off, Joe.
I do often, I do often sort of have the experience that you're describing, Kevin, but those movies are so close to me in the way that Joe was just describing. Like my affection for both films are so strong that I've never really thought about an either or before about those 2 films. But it's so hard to there are some sequels that are more easy to understand and digest without necessarily appreciating the original. That's
like T2.
Like T2, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
The Godfather is an example where that you can't understand Godfather 2 at all without the original. They're of a piece in that sense.
All right, I am an Aliens guy over Alien. Now, that's probably because I'm more of a James Cameron fan. I love Ridley Scott. I just rewatched Gladiator. It's just incredible the work he's done. But I'm just interested where you guys land on that. That's always a very interesting one. Aliens versus Alien. One's a horror film, one's an action film. I will always pop in Aliens. Which one would you pop in?
It's a complicated question, because Alien is one of the more visually stunning and terrifying movies that I saw in my youth. But Aliens, I think, is one of the great, we talked about this earlier, one of the great screenplays that functions as a template for modern commercial filmmaking. You go back and watch that movie, it's got everything in it. Cameron made the quip famous, the last line, the hero's last line, he made it famous in that film. And there's an intensity and a rawness to it where he's got this, the sort of military edge to it. But it's also a thriller, and he just sort of, you can see what he did with the original concept and then how he turned it into pop art, and so I think if I were to choose, I for ease of watch, it's Aliens, but if I want to study filmmaking, it's Alien.
Anthony?
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys.
Yeah.
I give the edge to Aliens as well.
All right, Bad Boys 2 or Bad Boys 1? I'm a 2 guy. I love Michael
really?
Bay. Dude, Bad Boys 2 is one of my favorite, dude, you guys have seen it, right? But that
Yes.
circle shootout shot
Oh, yeah.
as the camera's going through the freaking doors, and I'm like, it blew my mind. Where are you guys on that one?
I have to abstain from this one because I don't know Bad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I will say Bad Boys 1.
All right.
Only in that I feel like it was a new tone that Bay had discovered and was playing with, and I felt like he found it on that movie.
I wonder if we're going to disagree on this one. Because I know Evil Dead is a big movie for you guys. I'm a 2 guy over 1, but specifically because I loved the effects in 2 and just the way he played with animatronics and things like that. I just think Raimi, I mean, Evil Dead 2 is basically Evil Dead 1 again, but I mean, you know.
He remade it with more money, and 5 years
Right.
later when he was a more accomplished filmmaker and he had more time and control. No question Evil Dead 2 is the better film. I think Evil Dead is great to show as sort of the first DIY, successful DIY film, right? Like he made it for no money. He hustled up some cash. This is in the early 80s. This is years before Sundance started minting people, you know, and he did this all on his own and he turned it into this big international success. So in that regard, I think Evil Dead is great to watch just to be inspired by what you can do with, you know, $100,000. But Evil Dead 2 is, you know, Raimi's masterpiece.
Anthony, 2?
Well, for the reasons Joe was just describing, I have a strong emotional connection to the first Evil Dead because of that. Because that movie was such an inspiration and a guide to us on a personal level about how you find your way into filmmaking, like what's possible on that do-it-yourself level. So I have an immense emotional sort of affection for that film because of that.
I do want to get back to the effects on Empire Strikes Back. I'm going to end the sequel discussion on this one question, which I feel like you guys are probably going to go, you're wrong on that one, Kevin, but it's just a personal reason why I like this one better than the original. I will always be a Die Hard 3 fan over 1, but I think
Really?
1 is, I think 1 is the better film from a filmmaking standpoint. I just prefer 3 because of the Sam Jackson element. And I remember interviewing Sam Jackson at Winter Soldier and asking him if it was wrong that I thought 3 was better than 1. He goes, no, 1's the best one. Most people say 1. So I'm just interested, like, do you guys even like 3? Is it crazy that I like 3 more than 1? Like, does that sound
I like
blasphemous?
3, but I think 1 is an absolute classic, right?
Yeah.
Like this is one of the great action films ever made. And I think, you know, again, like in that period in the 80s, we were transitioning from, you know, an action movie would be Bonnie and Clyde or Butch and Sundance. So that's great. Look at that.
That's literally my Die Hard 3 ticket. That's why it's my
That's
favorite.
awesome.
It was the first ticket I ever collected.
That's super cool.
And it's sitting in this wallet.
That
Oh my
carry
God.
it with
That's
you, or
awesome.
you leave that in your office?
Oh, this has been in my back pocket for 10 years. This is like it's a Costanza wallet. Look how
You're legit. Sometimes you just pull out that Die Hard 3 ticket just to look at it, remind yourself.
Dude, I remember running. I mean, I don't mean to name drop, but I remember being at the Django and Chain junket and running into Quentin Tarantino in the hallway and asking him where the wallet is. I'm like, please tell me you gave the wallet to Sam Jackson. He goes, no, I kept it. Like Quentin Tarantino still has that wallet at home, so I actually brought Sam Jackson another version of this wallet, and he keeps it in his house. He told me. I don't know if I believe that, but anyways,
I bet he does. I bet he's mad that Quentin's got that original.
But Die Hard 3, so Die Hard 1, Anthony, I'm assuming that's your choice.
I would never call anybody crazy about their movie taste, but you're crazy. No, the movie, the first Die Hard, I really, really love that movie. But I think that's what's so fun about movies is like everybody's got their own personal favorites that other people don't necessarily connect to. And I love that. I love that when I have like responses to movies for strong reasons, for some reason that nobody else really responds to. It's fun.
It's also when we see them too. Like I saw Die Hard 3 first because I was 11 years old. So I was 11. That was my first. So that kind of plays into it too. So now back to Empire Strikes Back for a second. The visual effects in that film still blow my mind today. The Hoth sequence is just, it still looks absolutely incredible from a visual effects standpoint. And obviously CGI wasn't a thing at that point. So, and this might be a loaded question, but if you had to do, this is going to be a ridiculously loaded question, but if you had to do that ending battle of Endgame without CGI, could you have achieved that practically using the effects of Empire Strikes Back in the 80s? Like, is there any way that scene could have been done?
No, and to prep for that episode with Hamill, we went back and looked at a bunch of documentaries about the making of Star Wars, the making of Empire. And you forget, and there's a reason that Lucas didn't do all three. Like, the amount of time and energy required to do what they were doing and to get those movies to screen was so significant. I mean, CG makes things more efficient, right? So we could make Infinity War and Endgame back to back. If we had to make those two movies, it would have, that way they would have been 4 years apart easily.
Also, a big difference is too, CG has certain strengths, right? And part of the reason why it works so well in Star Wars in general is that, when you're dealing with ships or creatures, non-human forms and machines, it does a little better with. When you're dealing with a human form, you can see its weaknesses more, and it's like the virtue of the characters in the Avengers films are that they're not, Captain America doesn't fly a spaceship or fighter jet. You're dealing with a human body, and that stuff is much more difficult to achieve in a visual effects level. So we have to be, you have to use the tools differently depending on what the action is, what the storytelling is, and what your visual elements are. And I think because of that, the two are like very different from one another and how you would approach them.
Yeah, I mean, the effects in that movie are absolutely incredible. One of the things I find interesting about filmmaking, though, is that you guys keep your story so grounded as we watch these amazing, massive visual effects films that you guys are creating. But the practical effects and then the storytelling are all things that make these films work on a grounded emotional level, which is why we care about Cap, which is why we care about these characters. As you're on a set directing a gigantic visual effects sequence, as directors, what is the key to keeping your actors and the scene grounded, knowing all of that's going to be added in later? Do you just talk maybe more on a practical level of how this would go down from a human particular standpoint? I'm just interested to know how you work out those massive visual effects scenes as directors.
There's sort of two approaches we use to do what you're saying. Is the first thing we do is we very thoroughly explore what that sequence can be and will be before we ever get to set.
Right.
With animation, with storyboarding, with key art that's done by our production designer, so that we have a really elaborate visual map of what the sequence is going to be. And we expose the actors to that visual map so that they can understand it and visualize it and see how it flows. The second thing we do is when we're on set and when we're executing is we try to have as much there as possible for the actors to actually use, react to, and engage with. So they're not sort of, because again, it can really bring a performance to life when the actor has something to push against, whether it be people or objects or visual cues. So we kind of do both of those things, make sure that they are exposed to our plan and also support them with other actors and props, etc.
We're in a time period right now where theaters are not open. And we are, I really want to get back to theaters. I really want to see Tenet on July 31st. I want to see it in 70 millimeter IMAX at AMC City Walk and experience it on that big screen. As directors who have been in this business for as long as you have and movies you've made, do you really see theaters reopening back up and that film opening on July 31st? Or are we being too optimistic about that?
It's a complicated question. I think, everyone has a different threshold for risk, it seems, in the country right now. And I think that really depends on what your threshold for risk is, but certainly being in an enclosed space is a high risk situation. So, there's the question of whether we want that to happen, which we do, but whether that's practical and safe and whether we could recommend it, which I don't think we could, right? Because, just from the way that I'm approaching the pandemic with my family is we're very conservative about it. So, I think, look, if you go back and look at the Spanish flu, it was a 2 or 3 year period. I think with technology and modern science, we can compress that time frame, but it's going to be a year or two till things, I think, return back to normal.
Yeah, and Anthony, do you feel the same way about returning to theaters? Like, would you go to a theater if the movie theater's open tomorrow?
listen, I am sort of as desperate for the theatrical experience as you are, and also in general, like, everybody is, I think it's worn on people in many different ways, the sort of limitations that we've all been living through. But I do think at the end of the day, where are you going to put the risk? And I think there are more immediate places to put the risk in terms of human connection than a theater full of strangers, unfortunately. So, again, it's a very personal question, and it depends on people's individual circumstances. But I unfortunately, I don't see myself getting into a theater in the foreseeable future.
I think let's say this: if they do release it, then I think plenty of people will show up.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, one thing I will say to you, and right now everyone's been watching a lot of films, which is why you guys created this Pizza Film School, which is amazing. And the other day we were doing a segment on our podcast called Warm Blanket Blend, which is a movie that kind of like makes you feel good. Like you just kind of put it on to watch just to kind of make you feel better, or like it just takes you to a place. And mine was weirdly enough Notting Hill, because my wife and I love that film. In a strange way, we just love that movie. What's that film for you? That comfort film? I'm sure Strikes Back is one of those, but is there a particular comfort film that each of you like to watch?
Flash Gordon. I can put on Flash Gordon anytime, any day, and watch it start to finish.
Oh, Midnight Run. That movie just makes me feel good all the way through. Whenever I look, even I can watch it in part or in whole, I always get good feelings.
I appreciate you guys. I hope you guys are staying safe, and thank you so much for taking the time today and doing what you guys are doing. You guys have always been so kind to me. I can't thank you enough. Seriously.
We love you, Kevin. You be safe, and we'll talk to you soon, man.
Yeah, we love you guys too, and stay safe. Give my best to your families, and thank you again for letting me host that Q&A for Endgame. That made me so happy. That was so much fun. So thank you guys.
Anytime, man. We got a couple more coming up you might want to host. So,
dude, honestly, I will be there for anything. I'll do Cherry. I'll do Cherry 2. I'll do anything you guys need me to do.